The Specters of Algeria is the debut novel by Korean author Hwang Jung. It was translated into English by Yewon Jung and is published by Honford Star, and it's a curious little thing. At just 160 pages, The Specters of Algeria is separated into 4 parts, although part 4 is more of an epilogue. So you can kind of see it as like a 3-act play. Part 1 follows a young woman called Yule, who is friends with a boy called Jing, who's her own age. Yule's parents and Jing's parents are friends, and the two of them kind of grew up together, but they also grew up during the South Korean military dictatorship, which is a thing that not everyone knows about. Everyone knows that North Korea is currently under a dictatorship. But between the Korean War and a civil uprising of the mid-1980s, so was South Korea. And Yule and Jing were kids during this time. Eventually they grow apart. Something happens that creates a rift between their families, between these two people, and their lives go on individually. Yule ends up opening a shop that does clothing alterations in Seoul, while Jing goes abroad somewhere. The last time the two of them see each other, that's it. It's a very quick severing of their bond, and neither knows what happens to the other. But we follow Yule as her life goes on. We know that her father was part of a theatre troupe, and increasingly as we learn more about her father, about this theatre troupe, we also learn about her uncle Osu. And Osu, in a way, is the novel's protagonist. We learn about him through Yule's perspective, and we kind of trace her life. We trace her childhood, we trace her relationships, her family. We get little hints at South Korean politics as things go on, and we try to piece together an understanding of Yule's family, Jing's family, and this Uncle Osu. But in the first part, things are lacking in context. There's an air of mystery about it, there's a sense of naivety. It kind of reminded me of To Kill a Mockingbird. How there you get an entire novel about very serious political and social issues from a child's perspective, a child who naively only understands so much, and that is by design. It's very similar here. With only Yule's perspective, things feel like they are missing, like we're trying to cling to something we can't quite grasp. And it's frustrating, but in a very tantalizing way, you want to know more. Then we get to part 2, and part 2 follows someone called Chol-soo. Chol-soo is someone who lives in modern-day South Korea and works for a small community theatre. Through Chol-soo's eyes, we kind of fill in the blanks of what we didn't quite get in Yule's story, and again, this is specifically about Uncle Osu. A lot of the novel is actually set on Jeju, which is an island south of Korea. It's a place where a lot of people go on holiday, and it's a very peaceful place that I wish I could have visited when I lived there. I'll go at some point, maybe in the future. It's suitable that the novel kind of feels like a 3-act play, because theatre is an important aspect of this novel. And when we follow Chol-soo, we get to know more about Osu from a totally different perspective, a totally different angle, someone who lives in the modern day and isn't related to this family dynamic. Now, the very contents page gives us away, so I don't mind mentioning it, but part 3 is about Osu himself, and it's in part 3 that we learn so much about what happened during Yule's childhood, what it was that made these people so interesting and kind of enigmatic, and so many pieces get filled in. In part 2, when we follow Chol-soo's story, we learn that he wants to be a playwright, and Osu was a playwright. He worked in theatre, he wrote a lot of plays, he also directed some of those plays, and this connects him to Yule's family from the beginning of the novel. One of the plays that he wrote and directed that he was best known for was the titular The Specters of Algeria. This was a play that Osu supposedly created. He put it on like 100 times throughout his career, and now he runs a bar on Jeju called Algeria. A key thing to remember is that this was all during the South Korean military dictatorship. And another important thing to note is that the book's blurb says this: a group of dramatists commit a subversive act during the South Korean military dictatorship, distributing copies of Karl Marx's only surviving play, The Specters of Algeria. The blurb tells us that that play was actually written by Karl Marx himself, the only play he ever wrote. And so if you read the blurb and then you go into the novel, you know that Osu never wrote The Specters of Algeria. He somehow found it and adapted it and took credit for it, but it was originally written by Karl Marx. This is not mentioned at all until part 3, and it's a curious thing to put in the blurb. But putting it in the blurb does add an air of mystery and excitement, because you know that this is a subversive act done by a theatre troupe, that art is always subversive, especially in times of oppressive political regimes. Whether it be through music, fashion, performance, literature, poetry, art is often subversive. Art is often antagonistic towards the powers that be. And so we assume that what we have here is a group of Marxist artists, Marxist dramatists, who want to do something courageous through their art. But without reading the blurb, as you go through the novel, you just assume that The Specters of Algeria was written by Osu. And as we read part 2 and we're learning from Cholsu's perspective, it seems like Osu was something of a legend, someone for Cholsu to look up to and seek out. But it's not until part 3, when we get to Osu's story, that we really learn the politics, the philosophy, the ideology being put forward by the author. What she's really trying to get at here through this disjointed and very engaging narrative. Without spoiling anything, I can safely say that this is a book about truth, a book about personal truths and personal ideologies versus status quo, versus power, versus oppression. The themes become clear relatively late on in the novel. For a book that is about subversive acts of artistic truth versus power, especially a power that is so oppressive and corrupt, to make the themes quite hidden under so much text and so much mystery and confusion is a curious approach. But it does make the themes hit harder when it's finally obvious what the novel is trying to do. Rather than make the themes clear from the beginning, things are being drawn out. We are being asked to dedicate ourselves to this story, to these people, and eventually we will come to know them, understand them, form bonds with them, and it'll all be worth it when the themes kind of come crashing down around us. Side note, I want to apologize for the lighting situation in this video. It was raining really, really badly like 2 hours ago, and now the sun's come out. And so the clouds are passing by and the sun is coming and going, and I cannot control it at all. My camera's having a field day trying to figure out how much light to let in. I've got a ring light on me. It's not helping at all. I think it's making it worse. It's ridiculous. It's giving me a headache. Anyway, sorry. Honestly, it's tough to know what to make of this novel. As a Marxist, as someone who loves theatre, as someone who loves South Korean literature, this is in so many ways a book that was just written for me, something that I should just eat up. But it's quite a manipulative narrative in the way that it buries the lead when it comes to its revelations, when it comes to its themes. The fact that you have 3 almost entirely separate narratives that are completely interwoven, but in a pretty confusing way, which again kind of buries the lead. All of that is titillating. And depending on who you are and how you feel when you read it, that titillation can be exciting. It can feel fresh. And it can make you feel driven to learn more and understand it. Or it might just piss you off. I kind of towed a line between those two feelings as I read it. I read it in a single afternoon, cover to cover, and I found myself sort of drifting from one feeling to the other, feeling thrust into this world, into the lives of these characters, trying to understand their personal dramas, their political feelings and the motives for what they do and why, and the way that it jumps between dictatorship Korea and modern day Korea. All of this is captivating, but also frustrating, because you just want to understand. And I think that the blurb, in a way, kind of hinders us. It gives away a lot of things that aren't revealed until later on, and it made me wonder, what would the experience of reading this have been like if I didn't know that The Specters of Algeria was written by Marx? And then, of course, I did Google it before I even started reading this. Did Marx actually write a play? Nothing comes up. And that made me wonder more. Okay, so is this like a fictionalized version of Marx? Does Hwang Jung know something that we don't? You have to read on and find out. That in itself was motivation enough. This is a really experimental piece of literature in terms of its form and format. And I love experimental literature. Stuff that breaks the mold. Stuff that teases us. Stuff that encourages us to care about its drama and its characters before revealing its themes. That's really exciting to me. And it's a short novel, so none of it is drawn out in an aching kind of a way. But I still felt frustrated by it. And I don't really mind that frustration, but it was there. It's a curious thing. A very, very curious thing. If you're a fan of political narratives, if you're a fan of theatre and the power of art, and revolutionary concepts, and Korean literature in general, you're going to really enjoy this. It's a teasing, taunting, tantalizing, titillating thing. And I kind of appreciate it for that when all is said and done. So check it out. Support me on Patreon if you enjoyed this, and subscribe for books.